Dear guests, please let us now wait the arrival of Her Majesty Queen Máxima, which will be in a few minutes. Please stay seated. Dear guests, Her Majesty Queen Máxima.
Your Majesty, Queen Máxima, ambassadors, excellencies and other diplomats from many Asian, African and European countries. Keynote speaker Franco from Oxford, the delegation of the Yogyakarta Sultanate led by Crown Princess Mangkubumi and Princess Bandoro. Other delegation members from Indonesia, including the mayor of the city of Bogor, the delegation of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, the mayor of the city of Leiden and the King's Deputy Commissioner for the province of South Holland, the president of the Council on Library and Information Resources, colleagues from the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, the International Institute for Asian Studies, the Royal Tropical Institute and the Royal Netherlands Academy of Sciences, researchers, professors, library colleagues from all over the world, our partners in the Leiden Asia Year, students, of course, PhDs from Asia, staff from Leiden and other universities, members of the Societies of Friends of Leiden University Libraries, the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, KITOV, the Cairn Institute, the Asian Art Society and the Chinese Indonesian Heritage Center, the editors and authors of the book Voyage of Discovery, and finally colleagues and all other guests who have traveled to Leiden today to celebrate this inspiring day with us. As rector of the university, it's an enormous pleasure to welcome you all to Leiden on this very special occasion. I would in particular like to say how much we appreciate your presence here, Your Royal Highness. You've just paid a visit to the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, the institute of which you are a patroness, and it's therefore fitting here today from this church for us to express our heartfelt sympathy for all those on St. Martin who have been so badly affected by the hurricane there and, of course, elsewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, Leiden has a very long history and tradition of studying Asia and its peoples, languages and history. The knowledge and collections of renowned professors and experts have made this place a leading center in these fields, both nationally and internationally. The university is recognized as one of the world's leading authorities on Asia, due, at least in part, to the collaboration among our various faculties as part of the Leiden's research programs on Asia. And in addition to this research, the university runs world-class research and teaching programs in this field for our students. We nurture the tradition of multidisciplinary research on China, Japan, India, Korea, and Indonesia, and our long history of research and teaching in Asian traditions with a special focus on language and philology, history, religion, philosophy, law, and literature. And over the past 30 years, we've also built up quite a track record in the study of modern and contemporary Asia, branching out from the original core disciplines and specializations into politics, international relations, development economics, anthropology and sociology, law and social legal studies, and culture and media studies. A recent tradition to our research faculty's facilities here in Leiden is the Asia Center, the Leiden Asia Center. And we collaborate intensively with renowned research institutions such as the Royal Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, the KTLV, and the International Institute for Asian Studies, but also with leading cultural heritage institutions such as the National Museum of Antiquities here in Leiden, the National Museum of Ethnology, Naturalis, Biodiversity Center, and Japan Museum Siebold House. Our research and teaching, combined with this close-knit network of academic and cultural organizations, makes the city of Leiden a major international knowledge hub on Asia. And bringing the rich and in-depth Asia collections and specialized services together in one new Asian library will further support our mission and our ambitions. So our library is indeed key to the university. Dear friends, I wish us all a wonderful grand opening of this Asian library. Thank you. And may I now invite the director of our library, Kurt de Belde, to the stage.
Your Majesty, Your Highnesses, distinguished guests, it is truly a wonderful feeling to see you, so many of you, here today at the grand opening of the Asian Library. I would like to thank you for making the journey to Leiden. The creation of the Asian Library has been the result of work that has taken a number of years. However, let's not forget that these materials have been collected, described, and preserved in the past decades and centuries, thanks to the work of many generations of faculty, researchers, and librarians, and have been expanded because of the generous support of a number of societies of friends and donors. Without them, there would not be the collection of this importance, richness, depth, and diversity. The Asian Library brings together under one roof internationally unique collections and expertise from a number of formidable libraries, such as the Kern Institute Library on South Asia, the East Asian Library, and the Southeast Asian collections from the University Library. In 2013, the Heritage Collection of the former library of the Royal Tropical Institute, KIT, in Amsterdam, was integrated in the Leiden collections. And it was followed in 2014 by the complete library of the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, KTLV, including the library office in Jakarta, which is essential for the further development of the Indonesian and Southeast Asian collections. And I would like to thank all who were involved at the university, at the KTLV, the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, KIT, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science for their support. The result of tremendous preparatory work was an Asian library building program to create a large, open-stack collection of 4 kilometers of Asian materials at the University Library, an additional book depository with 38 kilometers of shelf space, allowing all of the Asian collections, more than 30 kilometers, to be housed at the University Library, and ultimately creating an Asian library on the library's former roof garden. Designed by the two wonderful and inspiring architects, Katja Hogenboom and Jasper Velsch, the Asian Library comfortably seats up to 150 researchers and students who have gorgeous views on the historic center of Leiden, the botanical gardens, and the Leiden Observatory. The new extension includes, in addition, a cinema, a center for scholars, a seminar room, a group study space, and the offices of the subject librarians for Asia. And one truly eye-catching feature is the conservatory, with a garden connecting the existing construction with the new one. By bringing all of these Asian collections together, Leiden University has created one of the foremost Asian libraries and a major international center for the study of Asia. Together, these materials constitute an Asian collection which is on a par with a select number of international libraries and includes the largest Indonesian collection worldwide. The Asian Library wants to make these collections accessible to the international community of scholars and students, as well as to the general public. Moreover, by making available our sizable digitized collections, researchers worldwide are provided with new and exciting research possibilities, including the use of new techniques in the field of e-science and computational humanities. But even more importantly, we want to share one of the world's great collections with the world. It is vital that the public at large, who have often a cultural, historical, intellectual, and emotional connection with the materials in our collection, can also gain digital access to these unrivaled materials. We want to expand our close relationships with existing partners in Asia and develop ties and collaboration with new partners. Leiden is already one of the 4 depositories worldwide for Japanese art catalogues of the National Art Center in Tokyo. It has been designated as a resource center by the National Central Library of Taiwan, by the National Library of Malaysia, and by the Literature Translation Institute of Korea. Furthermore, the successful combination or collaboration with partner libraries in Indonesia, among others with the National Library in Jakarta, has resulted in that 2 important manuscripts have been designated as World Heritage by UNESCO. One of the ambitions of the Asian Library is to create, in collaboration with partners in Indonesia and other major libraries and archives around the world, an Indonesian digital library. Therefore, we look for partners to join us in this important and necessary endeavor, but we also seek funding to digitize our collections and make them freely available worldwide via open access. The Asian Library strives to be a hub for study, research and encounters between people with a profound interest in Asia. We work closely with scholars here at the university whose research focuses on Asian countries, but we also recognize excellent research in the humanities and social sciences worldwide by sponsoring the book prizes of the International Convention of Asia Scholars and by supporting researchers internationally through our Scaliger Institute's Library Fellowship Program, allowing them to conduct their research at the library for a prolonged period of time. We very much look forward to welcome all those with an interest in Asia so that they can visit us and use Leiden University's Asian Library. Thank you very much. And now it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce you to Professor Peter Franco, our keynote speaker. Professor Franco is Professor of Global History at Oxford University, where he is also Senior Research Fellow at Worcester College and Director of the Oxford Centre for Byzantine Research. He has published many articles in academic journals and edited volumes, but we know him especially as the author of The First Crusade, The Call from the East, published in 2012, which the Literary Times supplement called the most significant contribution to rethinking the origins and causes of the First Crusade for a generation. And of course, of the Silk Roads, A New History of the World, an international bestseller published last year and described by William Dalrymple as an historical epic of dazzling range, ambition, and achievement. Professor Franco is not only our keynote speaker, but is also a visiting Scaliger professor at Leiden University, and he will return to Leiden in December when he will be engaged with teaching and research. Yesterday he opened the Leiden Asia Year Graduate Conference, Debordering Asia, where master and PhD students presented papers on the myriad flows of people, capital, commodities, cultures, ideas, power and technologies that have defined Asia in the past and that make the continent so dynamic today. In his keynote lecture, Asia and the Making of Europe, Professor Franco will talk about how Europe's past has always been closely linked to that of Asia, about the great game for the heart of Asia that shaped the 19th century and played a crucial role in the build-up to the First World War. And how a new struggle for influence and power in the same region is changing the world around us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Franco.
Your Majesty, distinguished guests and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's an enormous honor and privilege to be here today to celebrate with you. Leiden is one of the world's great universities with proud achievements across the sciences and humanities going back more than 400 years. It's a moment of particular happiness not only to be here in Leiden Asia Year, but to mark the opening of the Asian Library. I'm sure you'll agree that this magnificent new facility is a fitting home for one of the world's great collections of scholarly materials. It is one of those rare cases where quantity and quality align. Home to more than 5 million books and 1 million e-books, the collection takes up more than 30 kilometers of shelving space. Its range is exceptional and unparalleled, ranging from 1,000-year-old Sanskrit texts written in Nepali script to the autobiographical manuscript of the Javanese prince Diponegoro that is so important that it's been recognized by UNESCO as one of the world's great treasures. The collection is up to date and relevant, containing materials that enable scholars to better understand the changing role played by women leaders in East Asia in recent decades, and even a digital database of North Korean propaganda posters. In some ways, of course, the riches found in Leiden's Asian Library come as no surprise, for the scholars of this university have long enjoyed a reputation for looking beyond their immediate surroundings. Joseph Scaliger was one of the earliest and most famous to do so. Scaliger was a remarkable polymath who was determined to understand the whole world and not simply his own corner of it. He learned Arabic, Hebrew, and Coptic to go with his Greek, Latin, and modern European languages, recognizing that being able to read the literature of scholars from other parts of the world was not just important, but essential. For Scaliger, history could not be understood without studying the great civilizations such as the Egyptians and the Jews, the Persians and the Babylonians. Scaliger's expertise and originality of his thought brought him to the attention of the university authorities here in Leiden in the very first years after the foundation of this great university by William, Prince of Orange, in 1575. The scholars of Leiden were determined to bring Scaliger to the Netherlands so he could share his knowledge. Scaliger's arrival in the 1590s was not only significant because it demonstrates the commitment that the University of Leiden has always had to keeping an open mind and maintaining a wide global perspective when looking at the past and the present, but his arrival also marked the start of the Asian Library. For on his death in 1609, Scaliger left all of his books written in foreign tongues to the University Library here, marking the start of the Great Asian Collections and the start of the Great Asian Library. So it's a great honor, therefore, to be standing here today as Scaliger Visiting Professor, following in the footsteps of one of the world's great scholars and one of Leiden's most famous sons. Although I should note there is one great difference. When the university invited Scaliger to Leiden, they made him a promise that they didn't make to me. Scaliger was told if he came to Leiden, he would never have to give a lecture. But here I am, anyway. It's also a great pleasure for me to be here today, not only to follow in the footsteps of this great scholar, but because as Professor of Global History at Oxford, I'm also representing a city and a university that has close links to Leiden. After all, the city of Oxford is twinned with this lovely university city. But Oxford also is another important debt to Leiden because of the impression that it made on Thomas Bodley, who lived in The Hague as representative of Queen Elizabeth I in the 1500s. Bodley was a frequent visitor to Leiden and was greatly impressed by the forwardness of learning that he encountered amongst the Dutch people. One of the reasons why he too was inspired to found a new library in Oxford, the famous Bodleian Library that bears his name, which coincidentally contains also an important number of books that once belonged to Joseph Scaliger. History does not repeat itself, Mark Twain is supposed to have said, but it sure does rhyme. The opening of the Asian Library today is a cause for great celebration. Libraries do not just preserve and conserve materials to do with the past. They are also places where new research is done, where new works are created. Future generations of scholars, the next in the line of Scaligers, will read and reflect in this new space that's been opened today. These windows will be the ones through which students filled with despair will stare when looking for inspiration. The meeting space will be places where ideas are tossed around, sometimes thrown away, but also refined, reshaped, and improved. We live in a world that is changing. At home and abroad, we see rising levels of dissent and breakdown. We see migration, refugee crisis, and famine as fundamental problems affecting all humanity. We see the effects of environmental change and the devastating effects of environmental damage. We can see the dangers of intolerance, competing ideologies, and the spectre of military confrontation and the rising threat of instability. History can teach important lessons about the costs of fracture, the effects of confrontation, the consequences of division. But there is much we can also learn from understanding collaboration and cooperation in the past, from looking at how our ancestors were sometimes able to not just trade with each other, but also to learn, to borrow, to imitate, and to improve. In this respect, we in Europe have much to learn from the East. For millennia, networks of roads and sea lanes joined villages to village, towns to towns, and cities to cities, linking regions together and weaving continents together. These networks have been known as the Silk Roads for the last 150 years, although they didn't just carry textiles. Other commodities and goods were also important along the Silk Roads, like spices and ceramics and livestock, most notably horses. But human exchange is not just about products. Language, fashion, ideas are also brought by travelers, traders, and visitors. So too are ideas about religion and about technology, news about other places, peoples, and cultures. The Romans, alive 2,000 years ago, were well informed about India and even about China, although some were very annoyed that rich women in Rome wanted to wear figure-hugging silks and textiles that came from the East. But interest ran, of course, in both directions, embassies setting off from China to learn more about Central and Southeast Asia, and also to gather information about the Red Sea, the Gulf, and the Mediterranean. Sometimes information brought back was not exactly accurate. In what might today be called fake news, reports circulated in China 1,000 years ago that melons grew in Spain to the size of 2 meters and could feed 20 men. That was no more correct than reports written around about the same time in Europe that there were people living in Asia whose huge ears could wrap around them at night to keep them warm and could flap to take them away from strangers they did not want to talk to. Those might be quite useful, maybe at a drinks party. Studying the Silk Roads helps us to better understand global history, for it was along these Silk Roads that empires rose and fell. It was to try to gain access to the trade of Asia that Christopher Columbus set out in 1492 across the Atlantic, taking with him letters addressed to the great Khan who ruled in the East. Columbus took with him specialists who spoke Hebrew, Chaldean, and Arabic. Scaliger might have been one of them had he lived a few decades earlier. Instead of finding Asia, Columbus came across the Americas, whose wealth turned Spain into the richest country in Europe and created problems for the Dutch, not least here in Leiden. To build up resources against the Spanish, the Dutch too set out on voyages, this time not of discovery, but following in the footsteps, or the navigational routes rather, pioneered by the Portuguese and others around the southern tip of Africa to reach the markets of the Gulf, India, and beyond. For the Dutch, the rewards of establishing, maintaining, and improving connections across Asia were both immediate and immense. The return of the fleet that set out for Asia in 1597, returned the following year, brought cargoes that produced profits of 400% for investors. The creation of the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie was part of a deliberate process to maximize these returns and build a platform that eventually produced an empire of its own, reaching into India, what is now Sri Lanka, and deep into Southeast Asia and Indonesia. Increased exchange brought a golden age to the Netherlands, a time of extraordinary innovation and brilliance across arts, ceramics, and textiles, a time when one amazed English visitor noted that even farmers were keen collectors of paintings, admired their own art collections. It was a time when city planners and mayors in Amsterdam, in Haarlem, and Leiden harnessed the latest scholarship to reclaim land from the sea, to build canals with sophisticated controls, and magnificent houses for increasingly wealthy patrons. So when we think of globalization today as something new, something uniquely challenging in the 21st century, but the truth is that the fates and fortunes of Europe and Asia, with the other continents, have always been closely linked. And this makes the Asian Library at Leiden so vital in the 21st century. We all know from our own relationships at home and at work that mutual understanding and communication are the basis on which friendship and happiness are built. And we all know from home and from work that sometimes that is easier said than done. Being able to understand each other's point of view takes time, it takes patience, and it takes work too. And as Joseph Scaliger once put it when talking about religion, division, enmity, and hatred all come from one source: ignorance. Here in Europe, we can sometimes be rather comfortable when assessing our own history, as though we live in our own bubble, as though other nations, regions, and peoples only play the supporting role of actors in the main story of human civilization. Yet 1,000 years ago, long before Leiden was founded as a university, the great scholars of the world were not based in Europe at all, but in Bukhara, in Samarkand, in Baghdad. 500 years ago, the king of the Songhai Empire in Africa was so keen to be surrounded by intellectuals that books were more expensive than anything else sold at the time. While being a scholar was not just the most highly regarded profession in the empire, but also the best paid in the entire realm. I assume this is still the case in Leiden. I'm only a visiting professor. We often think of universities as places where advances are made in the sciences, and this is certainly the case. And we can look to the Museum Boerhaave just next door for testimony to this in the case of Leiden. But the humanities, literature, and history are essential too to understand the world of the past and the present. And it is possible to make dramatic advances in the way that this is done. Again, something evidenced by the many outstanding historians, colleagues and scholars from this university who are present in the church today. One comes from the way in which we're able to understand the 100 years before the outbreak to the First World War in 1914. This is usually looked at as a period of enormous transformation in the history of Europe, a time when industrialization and social change, at least for men, mattered. An era of political consolidation with the unification of countries like Germany and of Italy, and from 1871 anyway, a period of prosperity and peace which were lost when Europe went to war in 1914. And yet these peaceful transformations in Europe bubbled, they boiled elsewhere in the world. Although historians often focus on the merry-go-round of dealing between rulers and politicians here in Europe, the seeds for the war were sown in Asia. Intense rivalry between empires, terrified of losing position, influence and power, prompted decisions that ultimately proved to be reckless and catastrophic. To give just one example, and perhaps giving a clue into some more modern times, in Britain it was believed that Europe was an irrelevant sideshow. What mattered was Asia. Europe was a menacing place, said Benjamin Disraeli, the future Prime Minister, in 1866. Britain should stay out of European affairs altogether, he said in one speech. The truth, he announced, is that England has outgrown the continent of Europe. Rather, he went on, it is the metropolis of a great empire extending to the boundaries of the farthest oceans. This was only right and natural, he said, for after all, England is more an Asiatic than a European power. This was not just wishful thinking, for the British did indeed have very extensive interests in Asia, especially in the Indian subcontinent, but also in the Gulf and in China. Protecting commercial interests was considered vital to the future of the British Empire, far more important than building alliances in Europe. The problems began not on the eve of the First World War, in the July Crisis, as it's sometimes called, but almost exactly 100 years earlier. Although Napoleon reached Moscow in 1812, his withdrawal marked a century of great change in Russia. Horizons, ambitions, and objectives changed as successive Tsars found their empire grew, on average, by 55 square kilometers per day for the next 100 years. This dramatic expansion soon brought Russia into ever closer to British interests across Asia, sparking what has memorably been called the Great Game, an elaborate version of cat and mouse, where spies set out to try to gain influence amongst power brokers in Central Asia and to position their masters ahead of those of their rivals. It often did not end very well, with some early protagonists arrested and beheaded in town squares as punishment for their attempts to interfere in local affairs. Then there were rumours and whispers that found their way back to London and to St. Petersburg, serving to raise suspicions and inflame passions. When Russia moved naval vessels back to the Black Sea in 1870 after being banned from doing so, some newspapers in London cried out that never had such open and daring defiance been uttered in the whole of history. Even Queen Victoria thought that this was too much, sending a telegram to her foreign minister urging him to tell newspaper editors to calm down and stop inflaming passions and urging war. Nevertheless, tensions continued to brew. The British began to draw up contingency plans in anticipation and expectation of a Russian invasion of India. Real concern gripped administrators about the Russians' ability to send hundreds of thousands of men into attack positions, while the British could neither do the same nor fund an effective defence. Effort went into propping up those whom the British felt were important, such as the Shah of Persia, who was lent staggering amounts of money by London and granted high honours by the British monarch in an attempt to win and keep his goodwill. In the Foreign Office, considerable thought went into finding long-term ways of diverting Russia's attention from the heart of the world at a time when the Tsar's frontiers kept rolling ever further across Central Asia, towards the Gulf, towards India, towards China. Britain's buffer from Russia, noted one leading diplomat at the turn of the 20th century, had been reduced to the thinness of a wafer. By this time, a new strategy was beginning to take place to divert Russian attention away from Asia and towards Europe. The best way to do this, in London's eyes, was to sacrifice relations with Europe and with Berlin, if necessary, to play up the threat posed by Germany and by the Kaiser. It was a matter of utmost urgency, wrote the Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, in 1905, that Russia should be assessing its position in Europe and not being ambitious in Asia. The crystallizing of these alliances in the decade before the outbreak of the worst war that the world had ever seen had its heart in an Asian context. European powers had done well from their colonization of most of the world. In 1914, a quarter of the world's population owed their loyalty to the British king alone. Protecting these gains was not just part of an idealized past, but part of the present and the future. As officials scurried back and forth in the weeks following the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in 1914, some realized what was at stake. What matters most was what happened in St. Petersburg. As the Tsar gave the order for troops to mobilize as a sign of defiance, the British had to make a decision. If they did not support Russia, wrote the British ambassador to St. Petersburg, the empire would be lost. If we're not prepared to make some small sacrifices, wrote the British ambassador to Constantinople, our very existence as an empire will be at stake. Asia had made Europe, and Europe's concept of what mattered in the East and of what the price was that was worth paying to retain its position in Asia was directly linked to the killing fields of Flanders, the horrors of the Somme, and to the catastrophic consequences of what happened as the war progressed and then finally ended. Exactly 100 years ago this year, revolution broke out in Russia, followed by the spread of violence and famine on an almost unimaginable scale. A new map of the Middle East was made at the end of the First World War that has such a bearing on the problems we see today. A scramble for oil followed in Iran and in the Gulf that results in the persistent and unsolved question of whether it's better to support autocratic regimes with little regard for democracy or to push for change that struggles to materialize. Understanding the past does not help us always prepare for the future, but looking at history helps identify different ways to assess and understand the world around us. Those who will study in the Asian Library today, in the years and the decades to come, will have access to some of the most important and valuable materials ever collected on Earth. They reveal worlds that once seemed new, unfamiliar, and strange. They help show how our ancestors tried to make sense of things that they had never seen or experienced before, like the flora and fauna of the island of Ambon in Indonesia, or Dutch-making maps of islands of Japan produced at a time when such charts were unknown. Your Majesty, it is a great honor that you are here today to open the Asian Library. As part of a family that has a long connection with the University of Leiden, I should thank you on behalf of the community of scholars for being here. Your interest and support for this institution means a great deal to all of us in the Pieterskerk here this morning. I have no doubt that the Asian Library will produce many more outstanding men and women who will consult the materials held within the library in a way that will continue to reshape the field of studies relating to the continent of Asia, which after all is home to more than half of the world's population, and its role in the global past, present and future. This is a very proud day for the city of Leiden and for the University of Leiden. It's a great honor to have been here to address you on this historic occasion. Thank you.
Dear Peter, thank you very much for this wonderful lecture, and I'm sure that our students are looking forward to hearing more from you, and same applies, I think, to my colleagues, the professors of this university. Thank you very much once again. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed this program. This year, during our Leiden Asia Year, the university and its 71 partners in Leiden and The Hague are celebrating the opening, we've heard it before today, a couple of times, our new Asian Library. And we are marking this momentous occasion with conferences and lectures and debates and exhibitions, all showcasing an impressive breadth of expertise. We're going to start this afternoon. To commemorate the opening of the library, we could, of course, not resist to publish a book, because that's what scholars tend to do. So we produced a book called Voyage of Discovery, Collections of the Asian Library at Leiden University. It is a splendid, richly illustrated book that contains essays authored by 29 experts from the Netherlands and abroad who all make intensive use of our Asian collections. And to give you just an idea of the breadth of the subjects covered, I will mention just a few examples. For instance, North Korean, Peter already mentioned them, North Korean propaganda posters visualizing female Islamic leadership in Indonesia, Eyes on Asia, photographic memory of a continent, or Traveling through the Emerald Belt, a plea for a post-colonial double perspective. As a result, the book itself is indeed a voyage of discovery through the collections of our Asian library. It has been edited by Alexander Reewijk and is published by Leiden University Press. Her Majesty Queen Máxima visited today the Asian Library and the KTOV and KIT this morning, and would now like to proceed with the official opening, and that official opening starts with a short video. So we'll first look at video, I think. This is it. Yeah, right.
Today, our university officially opens its new Asian Library, an internationally recognized center of expertise on Asia, accessible to students, researchers, and other interested parties. Our Asian Library is unique. Its collections contain rare and valuable items, including manuscripts, books, maps, photos, and prints. With this impressive library collection, our university attracts students and researchers interested in Asia from all parts of the world. The Asian Library owns the foremost collections on Asia worldwide. The collection on Indonesia is the largest worldwide, including the collections of the Royal Tropical Institute and the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies. The Kern collection, covering South Asia and the Himalayan region, is one of the largest collections in Europe. The Asian Library also houses one of the largest Chinese collections in Europe. Our aim with the new book, Voyage of Discovery, exploring the collections of the Asian Library at Leiden University, is to bring the unique and rich Asia collections to the attention of a broad public.
A voyage of discovery. Your Majesty, may I now invite you to come to the stage and to accept the first copy of the book. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our Asian Library is now officially open, and it just remains for me to invite all of you for lunch in this church, and then to take part in the Tour of Asia, which starts at 12:45, and you have found the program on your chairs, on your seat. I wish all of us a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much for coming and celebrating this wonderful event with us. Thank you very much.